Galloway's Support Through Sight Loss. Galloway's Get Active presents Jesse Dufton, Climbing Blind.
Jesse's kindly agreed to join us today, and he was the star of a BBC4 documentary that was on probably a couple of months ago called Climbing Blind, where Jesse climbed the Old Man of Hoy. So welcome to our meeting, Jesse.
Yes, thanks for having me.
And can we start by just giving people an idea of how you got into climbing and things like that?
Sure. So I like to joke that I didn't have much choice in getting into climbing. We used to live up in the Lake District, and my dad was part of the mountaineering mountain rescue up there. So when I was, I think, 2 years old, he took me out to Irol Slabs in Wales. Actually, I think was my first route. So yeah, I didn't really have much choice. Basically, I was taking climbing almost as soon as I could walk. And I remember like climbing with my dad as I grew up, and I think I led my first route when I was like 11 or something like that.
Wow.
When I was bored. Sorry, go ahead.
So it's just so you've basically grown up with climbing, and you've just gone from strength to strength on it. So were there any issues with the climbing when you first started with regards to your sight or anything like that, or did it not really come into it as such?
I guess I should say a little bit about my sight. So I was born like severely sight impaired. So when I was born, that was the high point of my vision, and I had about 20% of central vision and no peripheral vision. So yeah, I guess that I owe a big thanks to my dad, because he didn't seem to think that was a barrier, and I didn't know any different. So when I was younger, I could kind of see the massive big holds when I was really close. But what I could never do, and funnily enough, I only realized that this is what sighted people do when I was about in my 20s, is I could never stand at the bottom of a route, look up at the route, spot all the holds, and kind of plan my sequence. I remember being away with some of my friends at university, and then like someone talking about spotting the sequence, and it just never occurred to me that someone's eyesight might be good enough to see all the holds from the floor, because that was never the choice for me. But because I was born with such a low level of sight, I almost didn't know what I was missing. That was what I had, and I was going to use it as best I could. So.
Good. Because I know with myself, it was sort of climbing that helped me to come to terms with my sight loss, because we once went away to the Calvert Trust up in Keswick for a week-long outdoor residential, and I still remember it vividly today. The time when I came to terms with my sight loss there was a guy on the climbing wall inside who'd been born totally blind, so he'd never seen anything. And I watched him go up the climbing wall, and I felt something just twigged then, thinking, if he can do it and he can't see anything, I'm going to give it a good go. And it's through being on a climbing wall that really helped with with me coming to terms with my sight loss. So I think it's a great way of people getting involved in some sort of a sport. It's a very tactile, it's probably the most tactile thing you can do is climbing. So.
Yeah, so I think that people are often surprised when I say that I'm blind and I go climbing, because they assume that climbing is not a particularly good sport to do if you're blind. But it has a lot of advantages. There are no balls, for example, because I've had a quick go at other things like VI tennis, and yes, there's a bell in the ball, but there's so many degrees of freedom there. The ball can be basically anywhere, and it only makes a noise when it hits the ground. Whereas in climbing, well, hopefully the rock doesn't move.
Yeah.
So that's good.
So the Old Man of Hoy then, can you tell us a little bit about that? And did we say it was the largest or highest sea stack in the country?
Yeah, I think it's the tallest sea stack in the country. So I think it's 137 meters tall. It's a freestanding pillar of like sandstone that comes basically straight up out of the sea, off the island of Hoy, off the northeast coast of the UK. The easiest route up it is the original route, and that's graded E1. So that's still quite hard. Basically, the tower overhangs on every side, so there's no easy way to get to the top. And you have to climb up, and it's protected by trad gear. So as you climb up, you have to put in all the kind of safety equipment to minimize the risk. So yeah, and we split it into 6 pitches, so 6 rope lengths. So yeah. So
Can I ask a question, James?
Yeah, of course you can.
Yeah, it's Pete, Jesse. I'm one of the volunteers for Galloway's on the outdoor activities. Clearly, having watched your climb of the Old Man of Hoy twice now, being a leader, clearly there's a big difference between being a leader rather than a follower in any context of life. So how much mental toughness have you had to develop as opposed to just developing actual climbing skills?
I think, yeah, a reasonable amount. One of the big things for me is that when you place certain bits of climbing equipment, you can't look at it. Well, because I can't see, so you can't visually inspect your gear and know that it's good. So you're forcing yourself to climb above this piece of protection, and in the back of your mind, you're like, God, is that any good? If I fall off, is it going to hold me, or is it just going to rip straight out the rock? So there's like the extra mental challenge there. So I think that, yeah, mental toughness is a big part of leading, and when you're blind, even more so. Sometimes people say, is it easier because when you look down, you can't see the ground? And unfortunately, the answer is no, it doesn't make it easier. I don't think there's anything about climbing blind which makes it easier, unfortunately. Wish it was so, but yeah, you still have a mental counter for how long it was since you placed your last piece of gear, and therefore how much danger you're in. And that doesn't go away just because you can't see it.
I was going to say, because how much doubt sort of creeps in sometimes, when you're putting cams into the various slots, do you get any doubts in your head when you're going 5 meters further on, and say, I hope that's going to hold?
It depends on the piece of gear. So I like big cam placements because you can get like a tactile inspection. You can, if it's big enough, you can physically stick your hand into the crack and you can touch each of the 4 cam lobes and check that by feel that it's properly seated and it's not going to go anywhere. If you've got like a huge size 7 Dragon or something like that, that's absolutely huge. And you place that and you're like, right, well, I can hang a car off that, and that your mind's totally at ease. But if you're placing a small piece, like, I don't know, one of the Dragonflies or something like that, the crack is too small to get your fingers into. So you can't check that. And you're like, well, I think it's good. And back at my gear placement statistically, almost all my gear placements are good, but you can never eliminate that doubt and assuage that kind of uncertainty.
I was gonna. I mean, watching the documentary. I mean, to actually get to the base of the Old Man of Hoy looked horrendous to me, And I suspect that Molly was a great sort of support there because it looked horrendous. I mean, the slightest sort of step either way, and you're gone, aren't you?
Yeah, it's not ideal. Like, it's not the worst I've done, but I wouldn't say it's great. Like, at least it wasn't wet and slippery.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. But it's one of those things with experience. I'm a lot slower on that sort of terrain because I'm being careful.
Yeah.
Can I jump in there? I'm Simon. I have the pleasure of being one of the instructors that helped with the Galloway's climbing group at Westview in Preston. Do you prefer cams or nuts or friends?
I prefer whatever's gonna go in. I don't really have a preference. Big ones are the easiest thing, but I'm not fussy.
Yeah. Because some are going to grip better, and I suppose friends are going to be better than nuts, because in a small gap you might not feel it so easily, as you said.
Yeah, No, I do. I'm quite happy placing nuts too. I mean, say grit lends itself to cams, and grits are like the closest climbing to where I live in Loughborough. But I've climbed plenty of other rock types over the years where where it's mostly nuts and hardly any cams. So not really fussy, to be honest.
Yeah, right. Thank you. And my second question, if that's not jumping in front of anybody.
Okay, Simon.
Did you get any problems with bird life when you were climbing the Old Man?
No, fortunately not. Yeah, I think I must be a Fulmer whisperer or something like that. I don't know. Maybe they were being kind to me that day. Maybe it was the time of year. I don't know.
Yeah, the nearest I've got is sailing past on the ferry up to, I can't remember the name of the port. Yeah, on the ferry up to the port up there, and I looked at it in the distance. There were loads of birds flying around it, and I thought, that's going to be hard. And I was glad to be on the ferry rather than on the rock under those circumstances.
There were plenty about, but yeah, fortunately, none of them disgorged their innards onto us. Well, it did have to share a belay with a Fulmer, and literally it was sat right there, and she's kind of looking at it nervously, like, don't make eye contact. But obviously I was totally oblivious to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Jesse, Pete again. You've obviously achieved a great deal in your life. So, what's next on your goal in terms of climbing?
That's a hard one to say. So, recently got my first couple of E2s. So I think I probably need to try and consolidate on those. I would like to head out to Indian Creek in the States. I think that would really suit me. Lots of splitters where it's going to be, super, loads of cracks. You can't get lost. Super easy to place the gear because it's a number 2 all the way. That's probably something that will be on the list of what to do next. But I'm not really one of these people that plans out well in advance what I'm going to do. It's kind of more, what do I feel like doing now? I think it would be great to go on expeditions again. So a couple of years back, we went to Greenland and got a couple of first ascents. That was pretty cool. To be able to go on expeditions again would be ace. Exactly when that will happen, not sure.
Okay.
To go to Antarctica would be amazing, but trying to find a way of getting there because it's just absolutely so expensive. If I could find a way to go, that would be awesome.
Jesse, I've got a question from Denise, and and Mike's off because they're doing a lot of drilling next door. So, what she's wanting to ask is, where is your favourite place to climb in Cumbria?
Cumbria? Not that much hard in Cumbria recently. I had a couple of good days. The name escapes me now. Copper Dragon on Great Howe Crag, I think it is. So that was my first multi-pitch E1, and I thought it was a mega route. So that's probably my favourite. Apart from that, close seconds were Raven Crag above the old Dungeon Gill. I remember doing Pluto and Hollybush Direct there, and Castle Rock by Thirlmere. Those are kind of my 3 favourite spots.
Yeah, there's some of us that I don't know whether we're all in today or not, but when we were staying at an outdoor residential at Coniston called Water Park, some of us went climbing, doing a multi-pitch. I think the name is it Middlefell Buttress? Like that. I think they said it was one of the original multi-pitch climbs in the lakes from when climbing first started, sort of thing. I've got to admit, I must admit that I found that the hardest thing I've ever done was trying a multi-pitch. So because most of the climbing that we do at Galloway's is indoor climbing at Westview, where Simon's one of the instructors.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Jesse. My name's Katie. I was just wondering about how to potentially switch from sports climbing to is it trad climbing?
Mm-hmm.
I've done a bit of climbing and climbed with a few people, and we've done some outdoor sports climbing. And I just wondered, obviously the main difference seems to be placing the gear in the rock and not finding with your hand the kind of either finding the quick draw and putting the rope through if you're seconding, or putting it in yourself through a bolt. I just wonder if you've got any tips really on how you start out, how you can persuade coaches that they should let you have a go, because sometimes it's even hard to persuade coaches to let you lead sports climbing, for example, let alone do trad climbing.
Sorry, are you visually impaired in any way?
Yeah, sorry, I'm blind, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I think the first thing is, the gear, placing the gear is the tricky bit. So I think that probably the best thing to do is, often you can go to crowds, you can find loads of opportunities to place gear just along the bottom. You're going to have to get really dialed into finding, assessing whether or not it's going to be suitable for gear, and then practicing placing it before you put yourself in that, stressful and dangerous situation of being, a couple of meters up past your last bit. That's probably the best place to start. And then you'll be able to assess, okay, how tenable is this? And then obviously there's all the rope work about building belays and stuff like that. So obviously it's down to the instructor whether or not they feel confident to be able to teach you that. I would say that if you can find someone who's prepared to give you an apprenticeship, that's how I learned. Obviously, I was very lucky that my dad climbed and he taught me. But often I think that people who don't necessarily have that, their dad or whatever, find a more experienced climbing partner who will essentially kind of show them the ropes, literally. So I think those are kind of the two places to go. Get your gear placement sorted, see if there's anyone who will give you an apprenticeship. If you do want to seek some instruction, that's a really good idea. If the instructor is reticent, then you can obviously point them at climbing blind and, show that it's blatantly possible if you're prepared to try.
And I'm assuming there are some relatively easy routes out there that you could start on, because obviously for people who don't know, sports climbing is when you climb with like bolts, and you kind of got them on the rock and already, and you can just climb up if you want, if you're not leading. So yeah, I'm assuming there's some easy things you could start on for trad as well.
Yeah. I mean, like generally, quite a lot of in physical terms, the climbing and quite a lot of trad routes is easier than it is on sport routes. You don't really get much sport routes below like 5 or whatever. And if you were to convert the difficulty of the climbing on that to trad grade, you're probably talking, I don't know, VSH, VS. And obviously there's loads of VDIFs and stuff that are way easier than that. So if you're already climbing sport, you'll have the physical aspect down. It's just the gear that you'll need. One thing that you might want to consider is, I don't know of anywhere, but there must be somewhere in the UK where there's a bolted line that has the opportunities to place trad gear. So you could lead that route with a trad rack and extra quick draws to clip the bolts as well. And that way you're getting the opportunity to place gear in a representative scenario, but you're in no extra danger because you can clip the bolts as a backup. You could take two up with you. One gets clipped through the trad gear and one gets clipped through the bolt line.
Thank you.
Cool, you're welcome.
Can I come in there? It's Simon again. Could I suggest also that she top ropes a route, and as she goes up, puts her gear in, and then swap over with the belayer at the top and let the sighted belayer come down and check the equipment that's been put in and offer any advice on how it could be improved? I don't know if that would help any.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. One of the things that I often do with Molly is that when she seconds a pitch that I've led, as she takes out all the gear, she'll do an assessment on it, and she'll tell me if any bits were rubbish. So there's that continual improvement.
Yeah, marks out of 10.
Yeah, pretty much.
Probably. That's yeah, it's a really good way of doing it.
Jesse, it's James again. When you're not doing any actual climbing, is there any specific training or exercise routines that you do to help out with your climbing?
Yeah, so I started training more seriously when I got selected for the GB Para team. In a bit of a fallow period at the moment, but in the run up to competitions, I'll go through a normal periodized training cycle. So that'll be like fingerboard work, some gym work, loads of time on the rings, as well as antagonist exercises. And that will, that's planned out so that my training is divided up into blocks of training, and then that kind of builds and then tapers down before the comp that you're preparing for.
Okay, thank you.
And if anyone wants to take their training more seriously, I think the first place to go is just to find a coach. Sorry.
Yeah, it's David here. You touched on coaches. Is it not difficult for anybody doing a sport like this because of the dangers associated with it and risks as well? I would imagine very few coaches are loath to teach somebody who's visually impaired climbing, because at the end of the day, they're responsible if you fall off.
So not really, because the coach is only responsible for your physical training.
Right.
The physical training takes place in indoor climbing settings. Now, I'm taking that stuff that I build indoors and taking it outside. The coach is not telling me, where to place gear and anything that's safety critical. All the coach is telling me is the best way to improve my finger strength or my power endurance or my shoulder flexibility, which obviously all aspects help when I go outside climbing, but the coach is not responsible for my safety. So.
Oh, right. Okay. Because I know, like you say, you don't see a lot of things, and a fully sighted person, because gosh, that is dangerous. Just a natural human reaction, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if I can place the gear, which I can, it's not really that much more dangerous for me than anyone else. Like, I'm sure that I'm definitely more safe than plenty of novice climbers because I've got the years of experience.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, to an outside observer who isn't necessarily clued in, that probably doesn't seem like that. But to my mind, the risk is manageable, and it's all that really matters is, are you comfortable with the level of risk that you're taking on? Do you understand the risks? And I think I am. For me, although it sounds crazy, climbing is definitely not the most dangerous thing I do. Like crossing the road to get to work.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you're more likely to get knocked down or hurt, aren't you, doing
Exactly.
That's for all of us, that.
I guess when you're climbing as well for yourself, you're probably taking more time and more care placing the stuff than what somebody who's fully sighted perhaps does anyway.
Maybe, don't know.
So
I quite like not hitting the ground and dying, so
that's it.
We've got not to do that.
Got another question from Denise. She's asking, after lockdown's finished, what are you planning on your first challenge after lockdown?
So lockdown has already been kind of relaxed to a certain extent. So obviously, like I mentioned, I just broke into E2, which is a pretty big mental thing for me, because when my dad was climbing back in the 80s, he'd led up to E1, so that was the benchmark that had been set for me. As like, okay, that's the level that I would consider as a good climber. And I've now kind of surpassed that, which is great. So in some ways, I've just ticked kind of a big goal. And then week after next, we were supposed to be going to Norway, but unfortunately, COVID has intervened. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. So we'll head up to Scotland and go and do some cool climbing. Exactly what we'll do will be dependent on the weather. But yeah.
Okay. And what I picked up from the Climbing Blind documentary was the how important the communication was between yourself and Molly.
Yeah.
And you got to, I think you got to one point on the climb where you were kind of sort of out of radio contact for a little bit, were you? And it was a bit patchy, the signal. How was the feelings on that bit when you didn't have that sort of contact communication?
So unfortunately the radio headsets we have are very line of sight dependent. So they cut out fairly regularly. Even if you're climbing on a grit crag where it's only 20 meters tall, as soon as you pull over the top and you lose direct line of sight, they cut out almost instantly. So it's quite regular that kind of we have some kind of problem with them. I was fortunate in that on that pitch where you kind of go around the corner, the climbing is really quite easy. Compared to what you've just done, like 4B compared to 5B. So I wasn't really in any, I wasn't really concerned about the difficulty of the climbing, but it is quite run out. Mostly I was thinking about the fact that I needed to get a shift on because we were already quite late at that point. And while it might not make any difference to me not being, when it gets dark and you can't see, it does hamper my ability to tell me where to go. So we'd probably better get a shift on before it gets dark.
Yeah, because when I was talking to you at the beginning of the week on the phone, I was sort of asking what time it was you got back to the campsite after that climb, and you said it was about 2 a.m. or something like that. So
yeah.
A long day.
It was a long day. So the weather in the morning was absolutely atrocious. We started at about 3:30 p.m. I think I topped out, I finished the crux pitch about 8:30, and that's when we realised that, God, we better get a shift on. And then we've got the pitch that we were just talking about where had the communication issues. I think we topped out on the stack at about 10:10. But then by the time you abseiled back down, I think we hit the base of the stack about midnight. And then I think it was like 2:45 in the morning that we actually got back to the tents. So a long day.
Anybody else got any questions for Jesse?
Yeah. Did I hear you right and say you had Antarctica on your list of places to visit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Has any blind person done the North Pole or the South Pole or places like that?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
No. Well, you might be the first then.
So I've not been to the North Pole, but I've been to Greenland and I've got first ascents. I think it's probably quite unlikely that any other blind person's got first ascents in the Arctic, but it's quite hard to prove a negative, right? So go to Antarctica and get some first ascents and complete the set. Yeah, that would be good.
Jesse, I had a question about whether you've had any things that have put you off climbing. So have you had any mishaps or falls where your gear didn't hold or whatever? And have you sort of changed or learned anything if that's happened?
So I've had my fair share of falls. Fortunately, never had any serious injuries. I fell off a route in the peak a couple of months ago and totally busted up my top runner. Went a reasonable distance, and that taught me about when you're placing the smaller sizes of cam, they can have a stem that's quite a lot more flexible than the larger sizes. So while you're never sure exactly what happened, what I think must have happened is that as I placed this piece of gear, the stem had bent round and it wasn't placed properly, because when I fell on it, the whole thing just exploded, basically. So taught me a little bit more about, need to pay attention to the smaller sizes of the cam because of that. I think probably the most dramatic incident, well, there's two actually. When we were climbing in the Alps one time, a climber from another party fell, and he didn't make it and had to call the chopper to extract the body. And while I wouldn't say it's a pleasant experience, it did teach me one thing that was very important, is that when things get about as serious as they can, I don't panic, which I think is a really crucial skill. And then that also got applied when we were in Greenland. We had an anchor failure. So we were crossing a col between two glaciers, and the anchor that we'd built, the whole thing ripped out because the snow quality was so poor. And 3 of our mates went like 270 meters down the mountain, and you're 200 miles from the nearest civilization at this point. So it wasn't really ideal. We were very lucky and very, I'm not sure what the word is. Our planning had helped us because we'd selected a descent that was free from like kind of large obstacles. So although they went a long way, they had a clear run out zone. Yeah, fortunately no one was injured. But it's certainly a couple of times when you get reminded of how important it is to do things properly, because you see what the consequences could be. You know, I could have quite easily lost 3 friends that day. So, yeah. Did that actually answer the question, or?
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry, yes, it did, but I don't want to end on a downer or anything. So maybe
No.
someone can think of a
It didn't
happier
die.
question.
It's fine.
Yes. Are there any hints or tips or advice you could give to anybody who was thinking about starting climbing? You know, they've never done it before, and it's maybe they've something they fancy trying.
I think that indoor bouldering walls are a huge catalyst for climbing. They've definitely decreased the barrier to entry hugely. It means that people can go along without any kind of necessity to invest in a load of equipment. You know, you can go and hire shoes. You don't need any equipment. You don't need any rope skills. You can just go and climb. That's the best thing to do to try and find out if you like it. And then assuming that you do, then you can kind of move. There's quite a clear progression from that point. You can move from indoor bouldering to indoor running, to outdoor sport to outdoor trad, and then like to winter from there on. That seems like quite a logical progression to me. It's not how I did it, but then indoor bouldering walls didn't exist when I was learning to climb. So
Yeah, there's a lot more of them knocking about now, isn't there? So.
Well, there's money to be made out of walls, isn't there? Climbing walls.
Mm-hmm.
Probably why.
There was an interesting thing I was reading, and I can't remember the full details about it, but it was about indoor climbing since COVID, and I think there'd been some research or something done into the use of chalk, and that it neutralises the virus on the handholds and stuff. I don't know whether you heard anything about that or not, or whether Simon has.
Yeah. So I think that the research was done by some researchers at Leicester actually, and they showed that as soon as the coronavirus contacts chalk, because of the desiccating effect, it basically dries it out and deactivates the virus particles essentially instantly. So that's good. It means that the virus can't persist on chalky handholds, and also if people are using liquid chalk, if the alcohol content of the liquid chalk is high enough, the liquid chalk essentially acts a bit like hand sanitizer.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Thing that makes climbing indoors more tenable. The only thing at the moment is that obviously walls are restricted in their capacity so that they aren't too crowded, and you get people breathing over everyone else, which means that the walls feel a bit kind of empty and weird. But yeah, it's better than them being closed.
Yeah, so I know with our indoor climbing group, we've been really lucky that we've got a good facility at Preston, at Westview. And I know Simon's with us today. I'm not trying to big it up or whatever, but the instructors there have been really fantastic. They've really got on board and sort of taken on instructing people with sight loss. We've come up with some good systems for instructing people and telling them which routes to take, and because obviously on an indoor wall you've got all the coloured routes, the coloured handholds and things, and we've got a system now where we can tell people if they want to climb the different grades instead of just doing a rainbow climb, where we can tell them where they are. One of the things we use is the clock face, which is a massive help for anybody. And we've got people who are totally blind who've been, and we've had people who have got a reasonably good bad sight, if that makes any sense. So So yeah, there's a whole range of people who come climbing, and I think that everybody's just wanting to get back again. So
Yeah, that's really good. So when I climb indoors, Molly and I use a similar system based on the clock face. That seems to be the best solution we've got so far. So yeah, but if anyone works out a better way of doing it, then I'm all ears.
Jesse, do you do that with feet as well? Because I always find that people are good at clock face with your hands and arms, at a sort of 12 to 9 and 6. Sorry, 12 to 9 and 3. But when your feet go up, people tend to not use the clock face so much.
Yes, we don't use it for the feet. Generally, it's just like in relation to another body part. So it's by your knee or by your hip or whatever. We thought about using some kind of quadrant-based system, but in fact, it's just too complicated. And I think one of the critical things, especially when you get onto steeper terrain, is how quickly can you communicate the information? You've got to communicate the information in the minimum possible time. And having anything that was too complicated just impeded that.
yeah, sometimes when we're climbing, it sounds a bit like we're playing Twister or something. Or something.
Yeah.
So but yeah, it's I think it's a good sport as well, because it gives you the exercise, you've got the communication between everybody, and it gets everybody getting on together, working together as a team. But besides that, it's a good workout. You know, it's a full total body workout, isn't it? It's not just like going to the gym and working your arms or your legs. You're just working absolutely everything.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've had some people who've come climbing, and then they've sent me a text a day or two later saying, you know what, you bloody killed me on that wall the other day. So, but yeah, I think it's just a great form of exercise as well.
Yeah, I often, Simon again, I often equate it with ballet against gravity, where you've got to move your centre of balance every which way and decide how you're going to go. And it's just a wonderful thing to watch a good climber gracefully defying gravity as they go up a wall. It's been a pleasure watching a lot of people do that, because I don't climb very well myself. I'm an ex-rugby player who's far too big to do it effectively. But it's been a wonderful opportunity to see people who you wouldn't expect to do this sort of activity succeeding at it so well. And I find one of the best things about climbing is that you can climb to your own standards and to your own level. And it gives you an instant sense of success as a result of that. And if you don't manage it first time, go back and do it again. And that's a great thing. And it's really interesting, Jesse, about the way that you communicate, because that's one of the battles that we've had when we were introducing climbing to the group from Galloway. We had to work out a system whereby they could understand the instructions that we were giving them. And I think one of the other pieces of advice that we came up with was switch the music off, because that's an unnecessary distraction. And I know one of our instructors has thought, for those with residual sight, laser pointer might be effective. Obviously, it's only going to work for some people who.
Yeah, so we used to use a laser pointer when my eyesight wasn't as bad as it is now.
Yeah.
But quite effectively.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is that for the clock face, I would suggest that the center of the clock should be the hand that isn't moving. Because if the center of the clock is at, let's say, the climber's nose, as the climber moves through a move, the reference point is moving.
Yeah.
Obviously isn't particularly helpful.
Yeah.
Whereas if you center the clock on the hand that isn't moving, that makes quite a big difference. That's a static point.
Yeah. Is it going to be easier visualizing it from the center of your face or from the fixed hand?
The fixed hand. I think it might be more difficult to visualize, but it's offset. when the sender is at the fixed hand, but the advantage of not having a moving reference point is more important than the extra difficulty of visualizing.
Yeah. Right.
You switch over quite quickly.
Yeah. Diet. Apart from carrots, is there anything that you feel that is good for an athlete going forward onto a very hard climb?
What did I eat on the Old Man Ahoy? Pork pies, I think. So I just eat healthily, really. Like when I'm not worried about it too much at the moment. I have a good diet. In the run up to competitions, I'll try and reduce the amount of carbohydrate I eat, but not stupid. I think the biggest change I made when I joined the GB team was that I swapped having sandwiches for lunch for having salads for lunch. About it. And having good salads that aren't, just iceberg lettuce, decent spinach salads with lots of constituents in. That's it, really. It's not that rocket science.
Yeah.
Jesse, we've got another question, and it's saying, money no object, where would you like to climb?
Antarctica. Well, because it's so expensive and to get there. So if money was no object, I'd go there. Yeah. Other places that are on the list, Indian Creek, I think I've already mentioned. Like to go ice climbing in Canada. I'd like to go to South America. There's a place called Piedra Parada, where there's a load of really cool sport climbing, and some of the spires near Frey, which is just near Bariloche. Those are the places that are kind of on the list at the moment.
It's great because there's a lot around. Is it Monument Valley they call it in the States as well? Mm-hmm. Is that where there's is it El Capitan or something like that? I think there's one there, isn't there?
So El Cap is in Yosemite, which is different to Monument Valley. There's quite a lot of climbing around Moab. Things on big desert towers, Castle Tower, for example. Those would be places to go. I was supposed to be going out to Joshua Tree in the States in March, but obviously COVID intervened. So at some point in the future, that'll have to get rearranged.
Maybe next year.
Maybe.
Under those, in the light of that, how do you fund your climbing trips?
So I work. So my day job is my title is Principal Patent Engineer, which I appreciate no one knows what that means. Essentially, I look after the portfolio of patents for a tech company that make hydrogen fuel cells. So half engineer, half lawyer, basically.
Yeah. And hydrogen cells will have a definite future, you hope?
Yeah, I think so. So they're the only realistic prospect in my mind for decarbonising air travel.
Yeah.
So we have a program at the moment with a company called Zero Avia, which is demonstrating the first passenger carrying planes to be run on hydrogen fuel cells.
Right. What sort of range have they got? Sorry, this is nothing to do with climbing too.
Not sure about the range. I think they're planning to run the flights to Orkney with them, but I'm involved with the protection of the IP, not in terms of the engineering team, and my company is only going to be providing the engine, as it were. We're not responsible for the rest of the system, so we don't determine the range because that's not part of our area of responsibility.
Yeah. Brilliant.
The idea is to scale up to kind of international travel aircraft, so that the small jets that you might take that are run by people like EasyJet and Ryanair that will fly from the UK to Spain or whatever. Those are the kind of the target aircraft. Probably the next 10 years, something like that.
Yeah. I've got a son who climbs who works for the Department of Sustainability in Leeds, and he'd be very pleased to hear that sort of news. Mm-hmm. I think he got interviewed about the impact of Leeds' carbon cutting city budget compared to the proposed expansion of the Leeds airport, and the fact that one would balance out the other. So there wasn't a lot of point cutting the carbon budget for the city if you're going to expand the airport. But yeah.
So I mean, the name of my company is Intelligent Energy. So if anyone's interested in that, obviously there's loads of resources on the web.
Yeah.
And the application to aviation is only one application of fuel cells. You can use a fuel cell to power anything that has an electric motor.
Yeah.
Be that a car, a drone, an aircraft, whatever. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. We've got a daughter in Australia as well, so it'd be nice to be able to fly out there on a fuel cell. In Hobart, in fact, where you'd be probably setting off to Antarctica. But yeah, that's a really positive future, that sort of energy source would.
It's not going to be an immediate fix. The development line is 10 years or more.
Yeah.
But it is a solution. And the problem is that batteries, they just don't have a good enough gravimetric energy density at the moment. And it's like that's going to be possible. So yeah, in my mind, fuel cells are the best hope we have of decarbonising air transport.
Yeah. Yeah. And that we send everybody up in a balloon and then drop them off at the right point. Very interesting.
Any more questions for Jesse?
Yeah, I go. Some of us have walked part of, or all of, depending who you are, the 3 peaks in Yorkshire. Have you climbed any of those?
So I've walked the 3 peak. I've done the 3 peak walk. I've not done. So on Pen-y-Ghent, on Pen-y-Ghent, there's that classic rock route, Red Pencil. I've not done it. It's on my list at some point, but I've not got round to it.
Where's your favourite place for climbing? Sort of in, I know it's got to be Scotland or whatever, but within, other than Scotland in the UK, what would you say your best places were for climbing? Your favourite places?
So the Peak District is pretty good. Grit favours me. So done quite a lot in the peaks and in Yorkshire. So the hardest thing I did recently was Fort Lightning Crack in Hepton Saw Quarry, which is like quarried grit. So that's got a special place. And then, the nearest climbing to us is places like Stanage, Kerber, Froggatt. So I've done quite a lot in Eastern Grit recently.
You talked about doing winter climbing. Is that involving some of like ice climbing or glacier walking, things like that?
Yeah, so both like alpine climbing in winter conditions like we did in Greenland, or ice climbing on frozen waterfalls. So in March, just before lockdown, we got out to Norway and went ice climbing in a place called Hemsedal. So, yeah.
And how does that work? Is that like with ice axes and things? Is it completely different technique or?
Yeah, so it's quite. In some ways, it's very different. In some ways, it's basically just the same as trad climbing. You have ice axes. The bit that's different is you have ice axes and crampons on that you that bite into the ice, and rather than being protected by rock gear, so nuts and cams, it's protected by ice screws. So those are kind of hollow screws that you screw into the ice, and then you clip the rope through those. So in some ways, it's kind of easier. If the water ice is fat, you can place your axes anywhere. So the only thing that kind of determines your ability to climb the route is if you've got the endurance to do it, and whether or not you can stay hanging off your axes, which becomes quite difficult when you get up to water ice that's vertical, because when the water ice is vertical, it feels like it's overhanging because you're out from the ice because you're holding onto your axes, and there's no rests. So on things that are like water ice 5, it will be 20 meters or 25 meters of vertical, which obviously feels like overhanging. So yeah.
Wow, that sounds pretty intense.
The most difficult thing for me, ice climbing, is getting the ice screws started. So you have to hang off one hand, and with your other hand, you're trying to screw this screw into the ice by your hip. But you've got to keep the screw totally perpendicular to the ice. If the screw wobbles around at all, the teeth will just shatter the surface layer of ice and it won't bite. And obviously there's a bit of mental pressure there because you know that you're, at the most exposed at that point. So yeah, that's the kind of main challenge, is placing the ice screws. Once you've got them, once they bite, they're quite straightforward to screw in all the way, but getting them started is a nightmare when you can see. When you can't see, it's even harder.
Yeah, we once went to, I think it was Wakefield, on the ice climbing wall they have there, and that was quite hard. Like you say, you've got the physical ability of hanging off the axes, and when we'd finished climbing, it must have taken me 5-10 minutes or so before I could actually open my hand, because I've been gripping the axes that tight. It was just physically trying to undo your fingers to be able to straighten them because of the effort that was involved in it.
Mm. Yeah. So obviously winter grades have a kind of different. So I'd like to go and be able to lead some multi-pitch like Water Ice 5. So Water Ice 5 is where the ice is totally vertical for its entire length. Water Ice 4 is where there are vertical sections, but then there are also sections that are slightly less vertical, so you can try and take some weight off your arms. So if I could go out to Canada and do some of the big lines out there, then that would be pretty cool.
So have you taken any of the mountain leader qualifications, Jesse, for climbing? Like the lead climbers qualification or anything?
No, I have. I did my single pitch award training back in the day when I was involved at university, but I'm never gonna be doing climbing as a profession, so I don't need the qualifications.
Okay, thank you. Is that it? Has anybody else any more questions before we wrap up?
Yeah, it's me, David. I watched a documentary. Well, it's like a Michael Palin type program. I can't remember who the presenter was, he for doing the Antarctica. And there are boats. I don't know whether you're aware. There are boats from the Falkland Islands that go down to Antarctica. But like you said, there are. It is. It's getting there. You've got to get to the Falkland Islands or to Buenos Aires first and then on to the Falkland Islands.
Yeah, so I was aware of the boats, but they go to kind of the edge of Antarctica. To be going to be doing new peaks, then obviously you've got to get into the center somehow. So you're going to have to take a plane at some point.
Yeah, the Americans have done it, haven't they? They have a big centre there with little light aircraft. I couldn't believe it. In the cold like that, in them little aircraft.
So, yeah, when Alistair Alistair Lee, who made Blind, obviously has been to Antarctica to make, I think they call it the last great climb. When they flew there, they took an old Russian military plane into the middle of Antarctica, and I think they flew from South Africa actually, so it was a huge trip. But that's where the cost comes, so few people go that it's not a regular thing. So
it certainly isn't. There's more doing it now though because of the environmental research. A whole team of scientists now, aren't there, out there researching on the environmental impact and damage that we're doing to the Antarctica?
There are, but it's still, you're still talking hundreds of people, which is not enough to get the economies of scale. It's not like taking it's not like getting an EasyJet flight to Costa Blanca or whatever. It
certainly
a whole different thing. So,
yeah.
And there's the other thing of like, if I was going to go, you're going to have to go for at least a month, probably more like 2. trying to convince work to let me have 2 continuous months off would be challenging. So
yeah, it's something you'd probably need to look at some sort of sponsorship or something like that for that sort of a trip, isn't it?
So I think that the flight for one person worked out to be about 60 grand to get to Inner Mordland, where they do the last great climb. So it's kind of pricey.
You could suggest to them that you're going to do some field trials of hydrogen cells in Antarctic conditions.
So we are working on lower temperature units, but I'm not sure that I can convince them that to go to Antarctica rather than
2 months.
It might not work the same in Australia or that far down. The other side of the world might work.
Right, well, I'd just like to say thank you to Jesse for joining us.
Yeah.
And if any of you haven't seen the documentary Climbing Blind, I would definitely suggest you look it up somewhere and have a watch of it. It's really
still on
inspiring.
iPlayer, I think.
It's still on iPlayer.
Yeah, I think it will be until September, so you better be quick. But once it's not on iPlayer anymore, then it'll still be available on Vimeo. And the Vimeo version is actually 10 minutes longer than the one on iPlayer.
Okay, so yeah, so if you
ways of downloading stuff. That I did see something in a magazine a while back where you could keep stuff forever from iPlayer. I can't remember what the software was called, and it was free as well.
Well, yeah, if like I say, if you've not watched it, I would definitely urge you to go out and watch it. It's fascinating, and it was really well put together. So I'd just like to thank Jesse for his time and coming along to chat to us. I hope you've all enjoyed it.
Indeed, yeah. Is it appropriate a round of applause?
Certainly.
Definitely.
Cheers, guys.
So yeah, cheers, Jesse. Thanks a lot. And hopefully we'll meet again somewhere. So
Yeah. And if anyone wants to stay up to date, I think probably the best thing is just to keep up with what I'm doing on social media. Like I said, I'm going to go to Scotland week after next and see what we get done.
yeah, well, our services manager, Rachel was hoping to be here today, but she's got called into a meeting. She follows you on Instagram. She said she was watching the video you did this morning on Instagram, and she was gutted that she couldn't be here to actually get to have a chat to you, but she asked us to pass on our regards to you. And so when I said we were having you along as a guest speaker, she was really excited, and then, like I say, gutted that she had this meeting today that she couldn't get out of. But yeah, if you stay in touch with him, if you want to give your details out, Jesse, your Instagram and Twitter, Facebook, things like that, then.
So it's pretty easy. I'm just on Instagram. I'm just Jesse Dufton. On Facebook, it's Jesse Dufton GB Paraclimber. And I think on Twitter, it's just Jesse Dufton. But if you go to my website, there's links to all of them. The website is just jessedufton.com.
Yeah.
The advantage of having an unusual name is that I'm easy to find.
So for now, it's thanks for everybody for coming along. And we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Cool. Take care, guys. See you later.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.